Silence is often misunderstood as disinterest, but in most cases, it's exactly the opposite. When someone truly stops caring, they don't pause, they move on. They don't linger, watch, or wonder. Silence usually appears when emotions are unresolved and certainty is missing. It's a space between decision and feeling, not the absence of both. When she goes quiet, it's often because she's observing rather than disengaging. She's not ready to act, but she's not ready to let go either. Silence becomes a safe position, a place where she can stay emotionally connected without committing to a direction. It allows her to watch without being seen, to feel without being exposed. People don't observe what they don't value. Attention follows emotional investment. Even when there's no communication, awareness remains. She notices changes, distance, energy shifts, and how you respond to absence. Silence becomes a way of gathering information without risking vulnerability. Another reason silence appears is internal conflict. Part of her may miss the connection, while another part resists reopening it. Speaking would force a choice. Silence delays that decision. It gives time to process emotions without accountability. That's why silence can last longer than expected. It's a holding pattern, not closure. Silence also protects identity. Reaching out might challenge pride, self-image, or emotional control. Staying quiet preserves a sense of composure. It allows her to maintain control externally while sorting through feelings internally. From the outside, it looks like indifference. Internally, it's often uncertainty. This is why reacting emotionally to silence usually backfires. When you chase, explain, or demand clarity, you interrupt the observation phase. You replace curiosity with reassurance. And reassurance removes the very tension that creates reflection. Silence only works when it's allowed to exist without pressure. Silence also amplifies contrast. When your presence was once consistent and is now absent, the mind fills in the gap. She compares before and after. What felt normal becomes noticeable. What was assumed becomes questioned. This comparison doesn't happen when communication continues. It happens when space is respected. It's important to understand that silence isn't a message meant to hurt. It's often a response to emotional overload. When feelings are complex, people withdraw to regain balance. Silence becomes regulation, not rejection. From your side, how you interpret silence matters. If you assume it means rejection, you'll react from insecurity. If you understand it as observation, you'll remain grounded. Calm composure during silence signals strength. It shows that you're not dependent on constant validation, and that composure is noticed. Silence doesn't just allow her to watch, it allows her to feel the absence of reaction. When nothing dramatic happens, when you don't collapse or chase, the silence becomes louder. It raises questions instead of answers. Silence only feels empty when you rush to fill it. When you respect it, it becomes revealing. And that's where the real shift begins. Expend key point 2 in 600 words according to prompt without any heading, and flow speech naturally according to overall key points, and add only necessary ending line. Distance is rarely about forgetting. It's about protecting. When emotions are still active but clarity is missing, people instinctively create space. Silence becomes a boundary that keeps feelings contained. It's not a sign of coldness. It's a sign that something still matters, but feels unsafe to approach directly. Watching from a distance allows emotional safety. It lets her stay connected without exposing herself to rejection, disappointment, or emotional overwhelm. By staying silent, she avoids triggering conversations she's not ready to handle. She doesn't have to explain her feelings, define her intentions, or confront uncertainty. Observation feels safer than engagement. This distance also protects self-image. Reaching out can feel like vulnerability. It can feel like losing control or admitting doubt. Silence maintains a sense of composure, even when emotions are unresolved. From the outside, it looks like indifference. Internally, it's often self-protection. Another reason distance is chosen is emotional regulation. Strong emotions need space to settle. Silence gives her time to process without pressure. It's a pause, not a decision. A way to feel without reacting. And when people are unsure of what they want, they often choose stillness. This is why reacting emotionally to distance tends to backfire. When you chase, question, or demand clarity, you create pressure. Pressure threatens emotional safety. And when safety feels threatened, distance increases. Calm acceptance, on the other hand, preserves the space needed for reflection. Distance also allows comparison. From afar, she can observe changes without being involved. She notices whether you remain grounded, whether your life continues, whether your energy shifts. Observation without interaction reveals authenticity. It shows who you are when you're not performing for attention. Another layer of distance is control. Silence gives her time. Time to decide without influence. Time to watch without commitment. It keeps options open, and while that may feel uncomfortable for you, it's important to understand that forcing a decision rarely leads to genuine clarity. From your side, respecting distance is crucial. Not because you're waiting, but because you're choosing self-respect. You're showing that you don't need constant reassurance to remain stable. That stability is felt. It creates contrast between emotional dependence and emotional maturity. Distance also changes perception over time. The absence of emotional reaction becomes noticeable. When nothing dramatic happens, curiosity replaces expectation. She begins to wonder how you're handling it, whether you've moved on, whether the connection still holds weight. That curiosity doesn't form when you chase. It forms when you allow space without collapse. Silence paired with strength invites awareness. It's also important to remember that distance isn't permanent unless it's reinforced. It either leads to clarity or to closure. Both outcomes are valuable. What matters is that distance reveals the truth without force. And when you allow space without fear, you maintain your power, regardless of the outcome. Expend key point 3 in 600 words according to prompt without any heading and flow speech naturally according to overall key points, and add only necessary ending line. Silence is not neutral, it's shaped by how you respond to it. Two people can experience the same silence and create completely different outcomes simply based on their reaction. One reacts from anxiety, the other from composure. One tries to regain control, the other allows space. And the difference between those two responses determines how long the silence lasts and what it turns into. When you react emotionally to silence, you unintentionally give it meaning it didn't yet have. Chasing, checking in, asking for clarity, or expressing frustration communicates one thing very clearly. The silence is affecting you more than you're affecting yourself. That message restores certainty. It tells her exactly where she stands in your emotional world, and certainty removes curiosity. Calm composure does the opposite. When you don't rush to fill the silence, you allow it to remain undefined. There's no reassurance, no emotional outburst, no signal that you're destabilized by the absence of contact. That lack of reaction creates uncertainty, and uncertainty is what keeps attention engaged. Most people don't realize this, but silence is a mirror. It reflects emotional control back to the person observing. If she sees anxiety, urgency, or need, the silence extends. If she senses calm, stability, and self-containment, the dynamic shifts. Not immediately, but inevitably. Your reaction also communicates self-respect. When you don't chase answers, you show that your peace doesn't depend on someone else's availability. That's not indifference, that's emotional maturity. And maturity is felt long before it's understood. Another important truth is that reacting emotionally often locks people into roles. If you respond the same way every time, reaching out, explaining, or seeking reassurance, you reinforce the role she expects from you. Silence paired with composure breaks that role. You're no longer predictable, and unpredictability forces reassessment. Calm response doesn't mean pretending you don't care. It means choosing not to act from insecurity. You allow space without resentment. You continue living without waiting. That neutrality removes emotional pressure, and pressure is what often keeps people distant. Your reaction also determines whether silence becomes a pause or a pattern. When silence is met with panic, it turns into avoidance. When it's met with calm, it becomes a space for reflection. The same silence, two completely different outcomes. It's also important to understand that silence tests emotional leadership. Someone has to remain grounded for clarity to form. When both people are reactive, confusion grows. When one remains steady, the dynamic stabilizes, and stability creates safety even in absence. Over time, calm composure becomes noticeable, not because you announce it, but because nothing collapses. Your life continues. Your energy remains consistent. You don't disappear emotionally, but you don't chase either. That balance is rare, and it stands out. And if she's watching, she's not just watching your absence, she's watching your response to it. She's noticing whether silence weakens you or strengthens you, whether it pulls you inward or pushes you forward. Silence only holds power when you don't try to control it. And when your reaction is calm, the silence eventually has to change one way or another. Expend key point 4 in 600 words according to prompt without any heading and flow speech naturally according to overall key points, and add only necessary ending line. Silence creates a unique space where comparison naturally happens. When communication stops, the mind doesn't go empty, it starts reviewing. Without new interactions to focus on, attention turns backward and forward at the same time. The past is replayed and the present is evaluated. This is where silence becomes powerful, not because of what's said, but because of what's noticed. When she remains silent, she's not frozen in time. She's observing how life feels without you in it. She's comparing the emotional environment of the past to the reality of the present. The comfort, familiarity, and emotional rhythm that once existed are no longer there. And absence sharpens awareness in a way presence never does. During communication, emotions stay active. Conversations distract from reflection. But silence removes distraction. It forces the mind to fill in the gaps. She notices what's missing, not just you, but how she felt when you were around. Stability, attention, ease. Even tension can be missed when it's gone. The mind doesn't just remember events, it remembers emotional states. This comparison happens quietly. There's no announcement, no immediate realization. It unfolds over time, often in small moments, when something happens and there's no one to share it with, when routines feel slightly off, when emotional reactions feel unsupported. These moments accumulate. Silence also allows her to observe change. She watches whether you stay stuck or continue forward, whether your energy collapses or stabilizes, whether your life pauses or progresses. This observation matters because it answers an unspoken question: were you anchored to her or grounded in yourself? If your life continues without disruption, it creates contrast. The version of you she remembers begins to separate from the version she senses now. That separation sparks curiosity, not because you tried to create it, but because growth changes perception. Comparison also reveals imbalance. When effort was uneven, silence exposes that truth. She notices who initiated more, who gave more, who carried the emotional weight. In presence, imbalance is often masked by routine. In absence, it becomes visible. Another important layer of comparison is emotional safety. She evaluates whether the connection felt lighter or heavier over time, whether silence feels like relief or loss. That distinction determines whether reflection leads toward reconnection or closure. And this evaluation can't be rushed. Silence gives space for emotional honesty. Without pressure to respond, justify, or maintain an image, feelings surface naturally. She doesn't have to explain them, she just experiences them. And genuine feelings are far more influential than logical conclusions. From your side, this is why patience matters. Not waiting in hope, but allowing space without interference. Interruption breaks reflection. Chasing replaces comparison with reassurance, and reassurance delays awareness. The longer silence is met with calm strength, the clearer the comparison becomes. The mind has room to ask questions it avoided before, questions about value, presence, and what was taken for granted. Silence doesn't convince, it reveals. And once comparison is complete, silence can no longer remain unanswered. Expend key point 5 in 600 words according to prompt without any heading, and flow speech naturally according to overall key points, and add only necessary ending line. When you stop trying to be seen, heard, or understood, your actions become louder than any explanation ever could. Growth has a presence. It doesn't announce itself, and it doesn't seek approval. It simply shows up in how you move, how you respond, and how you live. And when someone is watching from a distance, growth is impossible to ignore. Most people believe the way to communicate change is through words. They explain how they've improved, how they've learned, how they're different now. But explanations are easy to dismiss. Behavior is not. Progress doesn't ask to be believed, it's felt. When your life continues with structure, discipline, and purpose, it sends a message without effort. You're not reacting to silence. You're not trying to provoke curiosity. You're simply occupied with something meaningful. That steadiness communicates emotional independence, and emotional independence is compelling. Growth also changes energy. Your pace becomes calmer. Your presence becomes grounded. You're no longer operating from urgency or lack. That shift is subtle, but it's noticeable, especially to someone who remembers how emotionally available you once were. Watching from a distance, she notices whether you collapse or stabilize, whether silence breaks you or strengthens you. Growth answers that question without words. It shows resilience, and resilience changes perception. Another reason growth is so powerful is that it introduces contrast. The version of you she remembers is now outdated. Your focus has shifted. Your reactions have changed. Your priorities look different. That contrast forces reassessment. People don't reevaluate what stays the same, they reevaluate what evolves. Growth also removes emotional dependency. You're no longer defined by someone else's attention. You're building something that exists independently. That independence shifts the dynamic because you're no longer emotionally accessible in the same way. Not because you're withholding, but because your energy is invested elsewhere. This kind of progress also restores self-respect. You stop explaining yourself, you stop justifying boundaries, you stop needing validation. That internal confidence reflects externally. And confidence built through action is far more convincing than confidence claimed through words. Growth doesn't chase, it doesn't wait, it doesn't hover, it moves forward. And movement is magnetic because it signals life, direction, and momentum. From a distance, growth also creates uncertainty. She can't predict your next move. She can't read your emotional state. That unpredictability replaces control. And when control fades, curiosity often appears. But the most important thing about growth is that it benefits you regardless of who's watching. Even if no one ever notices, you've still rebuilt yourself. You've regained clarity, stability, and focus. That's the real win. Silence combined with stagnation feels empty. Silence combined with growth feels intentional. One feels like absence. The other feels like evolution. And when evolution is visible, silence becomes the loudest message of all. Expend key point 6 in 600 words according to prompt without any heading, and flow speech naturally according to overall key points, and add only necessary ending line. Silence rarely ends because of courage alone. It ends when comfort is replaced by uncertainty. As long as silence feels safe, predictable, and emotionally manageable, it continues. But the moment the story someone tells themselves no longer fits what they're observing, silence becomes uncomfortable, and discomfort forces movement. At first, silence feels controlled. It allows observation without risk. It keeps emotions contained and options open. But over time, as you remain calm, grounded, and unchanged by the absence, certainty begins to erode. The narrative that once made sense no longer explains what's being seen. This is where curiosity begins to replace comfort. Curiosity doesn't come from missing someone. It comes from not understanding them anymore. When your reactions are predictable, silence is easy. When your energy shifts, silence becomes harder to maintain. The more stable and self-directed you become, the less her assumptions hold. She can no longer rely on the old version of you to explain the present. That gap creates mental tension, and the mind always seeks to resolve tension. Reaching out becomes a way to regain clarity, not always to reconnect, but to understand, to test, to see where things stand. Silence breaks when curiosity outweighs comfort. This doesn't happen when you chase or provoke. It happens when you remove emotional access and allow change to speak. Your lack of reaction, combined with visible progress, creates a question silence can no longer answer. It's important to understand that when silence ends, it's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's casual, a message that feels neutral, a check-in that seems unnecessary. That's not indifference, that's curiosity disguised as calm. And by the time that moment arrives, your position has changed. You're no longer waiting, you're no longer hoping. You're present but not attached. You engage if it aligns. You step back if it doesn't. This is why silence ending isn't the goal. The goal is becoming someone whose life no longer pauses during it. When silence loses its emotional grip on you, it loses its power over the dynamic. If contact resumes, you're not pulled back into old patterns. You're aware, you're selective, you're grounded. You're not proving anything, you're observing. And if silence never ends, the truth is just as clear. The story resolved itself without explanation, and you moved forward without resistance. Either way, silence has done its job. It created space for truth to surface. And once truth is clear, nothing remains unresolved.